It's basically learning your child's learning style and then doing it that way. Because if the quickest way to shut them down to school is if you have someone who learns audibly, like they need to hear you speak the words. Reading does nothing for them. If you're constantly shoving a book in their face, read this,
Yeah, sure.
they're done. They're done. So even if it's just me reading a book, then it's like instantly they're engaged. Instantly they're like, okay, I can do this.
Welcome to Thriving the Future podcast, where we're finding positive solutions to thrive in the tough times ahead.
What's different than everybody else is talking about homeschooling, and they talk about their mechanics, and they talk about their curriculum, and we want to talk about more the stories, especially about focusing on what do you do for lifelong learners.
Yeah. So one of the biggest thing for me is always been to make it enjoyable for the kids.
Right.
So what are their interests? Let's learn about that.
Sure.
So I've gone through several different, maybe you'd call them phases of homeschooling, because I've been homeschooling since 2005.
Wow, that's a long time.
Not necessarily all the time, all the kids, some of the kids, some of the time, it's, I've not ever been one of those people that's just like, we will only homeschool, that kind of a thing. Like, it's just been like whatever season of life we're in.
Sure.
What I'm more focused on what the kid needs than, what, people are going to think of me or something like that.
Right, sure.
So lifelong learners, I feel like I've done a good job of creating them. Like I've got some that, that have flown the nest. I've got 3 that have flown the nest now. And I feel like they all 3 are very good about continuing their learning process and not just like, I'm done with school, so see ya, that kind of a thing. So they're the same way, like, because at least I mean, I don't know for a fact, obviously, but I feel like because of the way that I, catered to their interests, now when they find something that interests them, they want to learn more about it. So I've always tried to do something like that. When my oldest few were older, like we would do unschooling, which is like that's. So what we did.
What unschooling look like for you?
It was lap booking. Have you heard of that? Are you familiar with that at all? So basically, you can Google it. It's not that it's mainstream, but I mean, you can find it. So basically you would build like a folder with pages. And so it would, if the kids were, so one time I was like, what do you want to learn about? And I'm pretty sure that my son was just joking, but he was like, chocolate. I was like, perfect, let's learn about chocolate.
Okay.
So you take a folder, just like a manila folder, and then you're inserting other folders inside of that, and then you're learning the math about percentages of, the, cocoa or cacao. I can't remember. Anyway, I'm not real good at the whole pronouncing thing. But, then they would learn about the percentages and, the making of it, the history of it. So we would learn all the aspects of it. So we were basically putting every single subject into learning about this interest.
Sure, okay.
And, including math. And so then, of course, like at the end of our, session of study of that, which we would only spend, like a few weeks on each subject that we were working on. But then at the end of it, we did, the chocolate tasting, which was what everybody wanted to get to and see, like what.
Really? Wow.
Do I like milk chocolate? Do I like really dark chocolate? And, so
cool.
It was a fun, I really enjoyed that time of learning with the kids when they were younger. I felt like it really worked well when my older ones were younger, especially. And then of course, like, I don't know, we were like 2 years into doing that. And, my oldest daughter would always tell people, they were like, oh, you're homeschooled? Yeah, we don't really do school. And I'm like, stop telling people that we do school.
Right.
It's just not traditional school.
Right.
She had been to kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And then when we started homeschooling, it didn't look the same. So she was like, we don't really do school.
So did you do homeschooling for kindergarten through second grade, or did they go to public school and then start homeschooling?
So my oldest daughter my oldest daughter and my second son were in public school. My second son was in kindergarten, and my oldest daughter was in, I can't remember if it was, I feel like it was second grade when we started in third, or halfway through the year actually.
Right.
But it was like, he was diagnosed ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
She was labeled gifted.
Oh.
And the school was not doing a good job with either of those labels, in my opinion.
Right.
And so midway through the year, I was like, I'm homeschooling. I am done with this. Like, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Right.
And, brought them home and, learned what their learning styles were and let them learn at their own pace. And they thrived.
Oh, good.
So.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially making it towards the learning style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your funniest story?
Oh gosh, probably the one I just said. Because she would just straight up, I'd be like, we homeschool. No, we don't. We don't go to school. We don't do school. Just because learning's fun doesn't mean it's not, educational, and that kind of thing. And I have always tried to make it fun.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times I don't know if they forget or they just don't think of it as school.
Right. Sure.
Because we're doing things that's fun, and we're learning math in the kitchen, and different things like that, and we're learning science because we're outside, and it doesn't look like school, it doesn't feel like school, so yeah, they don't think of it like that.
Do you do all the year round, since you're doing unschooling or integrating it into your life? Then you do it all year round, not just during the school year.
Yeah.
Quotes, right?
Yes, we always have done that. We have always in our family done. Okay, so during the winter when it's cold and everything, it's like maybe we're gonna do more school then, and then during the summer we'll do a little bit less. Okay. But like on a really hot day when like nobody wants to be outside in the afternoon anyway, sure, we're gonna be doing school. We've always done it that way. What's funny is this year, in particular, in previous years, we've done quite a bit of school during the summer. Like, I just always feel like the kids, like, they lose a lot during the summer. Mm-hmm, and then it's like, you got to, like, get your brain going again or something, get a jump start in the fall. So during the summer, I've always been, at least a few days, that kind of a thing.
Okay.
So this year, the curriculum that we've been using for both of them, the way that I've done it previously is that we've all learned the same thing, and they've had different levels of assignments. Right. So we may be all learning about the Civil War, but then one of them has a paper that is more advanced than the other one's paper, and maybe somebody's doing an art project and somebody's doing a diorama.
Oh, interesting.
That kind of a thing. So it's at their level, even though they're learning the same thing. We're reading the same literature. Living books, good books, sure, solid literature. And then they have different assignments that go along with those. Right. So now, though, we've just this last year started doing an online curriculum. This is the first year I've ever tried something like this.
Oh, really? You're doing online?
I've never... It's a Celis, which is, I'd never heard about it until a friend of mine told me about it. Sure. And I was like, okay, we may be able to use this because they're at this point where they're the last two that I'm homeschooling. They have very different interests in things, and they work at different paces and things like that. And so I was like, okay, maybe it would be beneficial to try this out for a year. And I didn't have high hopes for it, honestly, but I thought, well, it will be easier on me, because I've kind of been starting my own business back up again. Okay. So I thought, well, this will be easier for me, but then, if it's meeting their needs as far as their interests and things are concerned and it's keeping them engaged, perfect. Right.
So how do you balance that versus the unschooling? Which one is better? How do you still adapt it?
So we still do. So it's kind of funny because I still feel like it's unschooling to some extent, because they're choosing what it is that they want. Like, I'm not looking at the list and saying, well, you have to have this, this, this.
Oh, they don't choose it for you?
No.
Okay.
They get to choose their classes.
Okay.
And so they have looked at the list. We've gone over and we read all of the things about each of the classes, and they're like, well, I'm interested in this, this, and this. And they choose their courses.
Okay.
So, and then they get to work at their own pace also with this particular program.
Right.
They're not assigned, like, I can assign them a certain amount of things, but basically... It sounds funny, but I'm like, okay, let's work until you're bored with it, which sounds funny. But this past year, the goal was to finish, because we're not exclusively doing this particular curriculum. So they're doing other things. They're doing other literature. They're doing Bible. There's other things that they're doing in addition to that. But I just kind of was like, okay, what do you want to do? That kind of a thing. So I was going to be really happy if they finished 5 courses in that particular curriculum. So both of them, like I said, working at their own pace. We ended up, one of them finished 8 and one of them finished 9.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, well, this is working, obviously. And then this summer, I said, whatever classes that you aren't finished with, by the end of the, typical school year, I want you to, one of them was math. I insist on math. I want that to go all through the summer, no matter what.
Sure.
And then, anything else that they weren't finished with, I was just like, okay, so once a week, I want you to work on that class and do your math. And, the other day I walked in and I was like, what are you guys doing? Because usually they'll do it on Tuesdays. And this has been several weeks ago. It was like maybe, 3-4 weeks into summer or something like that. I walk in and I'm like, this is Wednesday. You usually do school on Tuesdays. And they were like, yeah, we just didn't have anything else to do, so we thought we'd just go ahead and do school. And I'm like, what? What foreign objects are you?
We don't have anything to do, so we'll just do school.
But they enjoy it. And that's the goal.
Right.
Is you want them to enjoy school, enjoy learning. That's the goal.
Right.
I don't ever want them to be like, school is such a drag. I hate school. I don't always want them to want to learn.
Sure.
So.
Okay. So how did you adapt the homeschooling to meet the needs of the ADHD kid?
Okay, so with him, that was very key in the choice to unschool. So doing the unschooling, if I could give him constant hands-on projects, he stayed motivated.
Okay.
When we were doing math, it was like the, blocks, manipulation. He had to have things in his hands all the time. And so those things were very helpful.
Sure.
It's basically learning your child's learning style and then doing it that way. Because if the quickest way to shut them down to school is if you have someone who learns audibly, like they need to hear you speak the words. Reading does nothing for them. If you're constantly shoving a book in their face, read this,
yeah, sure.
They're done. So even if it's just me reading a book, then it's like instantly they're engaged. Instantly they're like, okay, I can do this.
Okay.
That kind of it. So with him, though, it was definitely the hands-on. I got to get my hands on it. I got to be able to do it. He was the, diorama kid. He was the, we're going to do things with clay. We're going to do things with blocks when it comes to math. That was him. Wow.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Yeah, when Melody was in, I think she was in second or third grade, they said, yeah, she's got something she won't learn or something like that. She won't do the work, and you need to take her to the doctor. This was really before they started the big ADHD push, right? And we're like, what's going on here? And then our youngest daughter, Lydia, who's 2 years younger than her, she was in first grade, and they never taught her to read because they said you can learn whatever words you want, And they had kids learning Tyrannosaurus Rex, but they didn't know how to read. And so we had to pull her out, and so we pulled Melody out, and we homeschooled them both for a year. And then that's how the youngest one caught up, and then Melody caught up as well that way too. So
that has always been a frustration of mine, is like in public schools they try to teach reading so early. And the way that I was talking to my sister-in-law about this, and she's done a lot of study in early, childhood education, all that kind of thing, and the way that a child's brain works and everything.
Sure.
It used to be, way back in the day, that they didn't even try teaching kids to read at a kindergarten, 5, 6 years old. That wasn't, why would you try and teach a child to learn to read at that age when that's not what they're ready for?
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong, some kids are ready to do that at that age. But then there's other kids. So like my oldest daughter, she was reading right off the get-go. I have a niece that was the same way. I mean, we're talking like 3, 4 years old.
Right.
Putting letters together, no problem at all. That was their forte. They are to this day avid readers. Like, love reading. My son, on the other hand, basically the public school was like, there's something wrong with him. He's not reading yet. There's something wrong with him. No, that was just not how his brain worked. He was just not ready for it. And when he was ready, it clicked and he started reading. He was like 8 years old, and the pediatrician was, that we had at the time even, was just like, oh no, you need to put him back in public school. He should be reading by now. And I'm like, he'll read when he's ready to read.
Really interesting.
So, it's also like, I feel like, to a degree, like a parent's intuition. And, if you feel like there is actually a concern, then there's a time to seek out help. But until then, I feel like it's very child directed. You can't make a kid ready before they're ready. They're going to be ready when they're ready. That's how God created them.
Sure.
So you just got to wait for that.
Right. Good.
Takes the pressure off of you.
So what do you do about, so your kids have grown. How did they carry that on in life? Did some of them go to college or what?
Yes. So my oldest son did not choose to do any kind of college. He went directly into like an apprenticeship situation.
Really? Cool.
Then my oldest daughter, she was very driven all through school. She was the one that they labeled gifted. She took all the advanced classes she could get her hands on. Same in college. She immediately went into college. That was, she really wanted to do that.
Right.
And she's always been like my, over 4.0 student, that kind of a gal. Devours books, reads more books in a month than I usually do in a year, and I feel like I'm a reader. But so she immediately went ahead and did college. My second son was very the ADHD one, very hands-on. Ended up being a mechanic, went and did a technical college for and he did that while he was still in high school. That's another, they can do that while they're in public school also, but that was a really nice benefit for him. Right. Again, hands-on learner, so that made total sense. And of course the others, like, I don't know yet, but right. The one is very driven. My third son is very driven to go into some form of the military. Okay. Some branch of the military. He's really interested in that. And then the other one, my next daughter, she is very much wanting to be an educator. I'd love to take credit for that and be like, it's because she loves learning because of me, or something that. But she I think ideally would love to just like get married, have her own kids, homeschool, that kind of a thing. But she would like to be a teacher. She would like to teach at a private school, preferably would be her preference, because she's very strong in her faith and would like to be able to relay that in the classroom and stuff like that. So that's really fun. Cool. And then the youngest, she is still like in the like I might be an artist, I might be an archaeologist,
You can do all those stuff.
Yes, she's kind of in that phase still. Like she doesn't know what she wants to do, so that's fine.
Yeah, one podcast episode we did was about being a wage slave. So everybody goes to church, and especially guys, within 2 minutes somebody's asking you, so what do you do? And you're defined by what you do, but there's the person who is a mechanic, but is also a poet, is also an artist in his spare time. He's more than a mechanic. He's also spiritual. He's also, a father and things like that. So it's such a box and a pecking order, with that. So we've been talking about getting away from that, right?
Yeah.
And because I do a IT project manager, but that's not what's interesting to me. Right? I like growing trees. I like gardening and stuff like that and solving problems. So I like the idea of getting kids away from that idea that you are something for life, right? Because that doesn't exist anymore, right? And you can be more than one thing at one time anyway. So do you co-op with anybody, or do you share the load? Like somebody's better at science, say one of the parents that homeschools and they're better at science or something like that. Do you share the load or get the kids together to do projects together amongst different families or something
we
like
previously had done that, and currently we are not in that situation because we live so far out in the country now. It causes a little bit of a difficulty with doing something like that.
Okay.
We're very, very involved in our church, and that is, I think the funniest thing ever is, because I grew up homeschooled. I don't know if you knew that. Like, I grew up homeschooled. My husband and I both grew up homeschooled. We were homeschooled in the 80s when it was,
it was
you
taboo.
are so weird. That kind of thing,
Right.
And back then the question, and it still is today, well, how are your kids socialized?
Right.
How do you socialize your children?
Right.
And that kind of a thing. I always like to,
next question.
yes. And I always like to tell him, well, I really don't worry about it because obviously I am very socially awkward, not good around people at all. So
I wouldn't know that.
No, I'm not at all. I'm not at all.
That was sarcasm.
I know.
Okay.
Like people skills, like I feel like God has placed the exact people in your family that you needed to have in your family to be successful in life. So, the most difficult person in your family that you have the hardest time getting, along with,
sure,
that's probably who you're going to encounter, later on in life is somebody like that. And
Definitely.
God's prepared you ahead of time to be able to handle that situation because that person was in your family. Those kind of things. So I will consistently tell people that. But as far as everything like that is concerned, we, like I said, we're very involved in our church. They do have friends that are also homeschooled. They're in, my one of my daughters that's homeschooled is involved in dance. So she with some of their homeschool girls like that. We have at one time we did, like I started my own co-op when they were younger. And it was beneficial for a time for sure. It was necessary or needed at the time, but it was almost more for me than it was for them to just have that, mom conversation, that kind of a thing. But at the point that they are now, they both are in leadership and youth group and things like that. And so that's where they will, make their connections. As far as like educationally, I'm not feeling the need to do a co-op and have, somebody else involved in their education. I'm not opposed to it at all. I've heard great stories of people that do that, and I think it's a fantastic thing. It's just not like, we're not at that phase right now where I feel like it's necessary. And honestly, they, when I've talked to the kids about it, they've not really been interested. So I'm like, well, why spend the money on the gas and everything, if it's not even something that they're really interested in.
Well, and some parents some parents are worried about science, right? Oh, I can't teach science, or I can't teach algebra, or something like that. And I think the most important thing to get about science is the wonder. The last couple weeks, there's been this meme going around that deep space object, galaxies, all this other stuff, and then it says, you are insignificant because of this. But one of the things that I found is I've got this telescope that's 4 feet long, and it's got an 8-inch, wide, so you can look at nebula and stuff like that, right? And it doesn't sit on a tripod; it sits in this stand on the ground. I was looking at a nebula, and when you look at nebula, they're not colored like they are on the pictures from NASA, because they color all those. You can't see that. I was looking at the Swan Nebula, and I could see the stars through it and everything else, and I was just sitting there, and I was overwhelmed. Didn't feel insignificant at all.
Yeah.
I felt this was pretty awesome. And there was one time when I was looking at Jupiter, and you could see the moons of Jupiter with binoculars, but I was looking at it with the telescope, and one of the moons of Jupiter went across the face of it, and I watched it go across over an hour. And it got over and it got off to the side of Jupiter, and you could still, but it had the trailing shadow.
Oh, neat.
So you could see the shadow going along after it.
Yeah.
And it was just so cool, right? Yeah. And instead of learning facts and figures and Jupiter is this planet from the solar system and all this other stuff, it's looking at stuff and saying, wow, and why does this work? And I think I'm going to go test it out and see why it works. Because I was always outside when I was growing up, and a lot of looking at the sky and stuff like that. So I like to get that kind of thing transferred, that wonder, that sense of wonder to the kids. It's harder to do because they're electronically stimulated. I try and show it to Malachi. Malachi's like, yeah, whatever. And
yeah.
So what have you found how to help them with science and things like that?
Well, as far as science is concerned, it's been a lot of get outside and see it, throughout their educations. And now we're kind of getting into the more technical stuff, I guess you'd say, which is where I have really enjoyed the online stuff, because when it comes to those kind of I would not consider myself a super sciencey person, aside from just observation, kind of like what you were talking about.
Sure.
So the technical terms and all of that kind of stuff, whenever, now it's kind of funny after they've been doing this for a couple of years, really getting in. We did a very vigorous science, curriculum 2 years ago. And I was like, wow, I feel in over my head. I learned a lot. A lot.
Right.
And they were they were fascinated by it. So that was encouraging. But I feel like with this online one that they've been doing, the teachers are very good at explaining things, where sometimes I don't feel like I'm very good at explaining things. And so, whatever way it is that they're explaining it, the kids are picking up and they're like, oh yeah, I get that. And so then, me and my, simplistic, observations of things, you're like, oh yeah, we learned about that in science, and this and this and this is the reason. And I'm like, that is so interesting. Thank you. I always want to, I'm definitely not one of those people that's intimidated by my kids being smarter than me or knowing something that, I don't remember from school, or I don't know, or whatever. They'll inform me on the science background of it, and I'm like, isn't that the coolest thing? And I'm always a big fan of turning it back to God's creation and being like, isn't that amazing how God put that together? Yeah. And just kind of bring it back to where, even though, because that's the other thing, there was a big hesitation for me, because it's not technically a faith-based curriculum.
Sure.
So there was a lot of drawback, to that. But then I was like, you know what though, I've given them the foundation
Right.
up until now. And so the teachers that they have when they're talking about science, it'll be, they'll say something that's off, based off of what we've talked about in God's word.
Right.
And then they'll be like, but isn't that ridiculous? Can you even imagine? Of course God made it that way, which is obviously encouraging to me, because I'm like, okay, what I drilled into them foundationally, via the word of God, it's sticking with them.
Sure.
Which is, as they continue their growth, their learning journey and all that kind of thing, it's like they already had that foundation. It used to be when they were younger, it was like, okay, it's quiet time, everybody's going to go in the room and you do, whatever it is that you want to do for your quiet time. And I outlined that as to what it could look like, but I was never like, this is what it needs to look like.
Right.
And that kind of a thing. And now I don't have to even remind them. It's their personal decision, which I'm really happy about. It would be very frustrating if putting that time into it and then them having no interest in it. But it's really encouraging that they like to go back and refer to God's word whenever they're learning something in school, whether it's in science, whether it's in history, whatever, they do that on their own now, which I'm like, I've always been a question everything. Don't take anything, don't take anybody's word for it. Don't even take my word for it. If I tell you that something is truth and you're like, I don't know about that, go look it up.
Right.
Go figure it out. Find out if what I am telling you is true, because I don't ever want, my kids to just take something at face value just because somebody that they respect or, they feel like is smarter than them, they should know. So I'm just going to believe them. No. Question everything.
Right. I like learning the language of it and, go and read Darwin's original, go read the original sources, right? And go read with some of those other things and then have a conversation about it, right? Now, at school, when you got 30 kids in there, maybe not, I like to learn the language of evolution so that, so I can have a conversation with somebody else. Most people don't. I mean, down in Wichita, our eldest daughter, they only have biology for 1 year, and it's in sophomore year.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't have anything else. And so everything, including everything from the cell and evolution, was all in 1 year. And so none of that really stuck for kids anyway. I think the cell stuff was always my favorite when I was in high school. I took every science class in high school. And we did the paramecium thing where, and we went down to the pond and took some water, and it was super nasty. Yeah. And we thought it was clean water, and it was super nasty. But then, sure, I can have a conversation with somebody else because I understand evolution probably better than they do.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're just regurgitating what they've heard and not ever actually read it for themselves.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, and I like to read a lot of the classics, like Ovid's Metamorphosis was a Roman work where they were basically taking the Greek mythology and they were Romanizing it, right? So they took Zeus became Jove, Aphrodite became Venus, and stuff like that. But they said one thing in there that was interesting. They said the animals are constantly looking at the ground because they're grazing. But man is made looking up at the heavens, so he can appreciate the gods. Except some men choose not to do that and become stupid like the animals. Right now in the morning, there's Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and they're all lined up across the sky.
Oh, how cool!
And it's been like that for 3 months.
Goodness.
And then the moon's moving across there too. So like last week, one day the moon was right next to Jupiter, and then the next day the moon was right next to Mars. And this is like 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up.
I'm up that early. I need to just look.
Yeah, and it's been like this for like 3 months.
Oh my goodness.
So then, but I mean, how many people notice the cycles of the moon, right?
Yeah.
Which cycle is the moon in? Which phase is the moon in?
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I could see the Milky Way from in town.
Mm-hmm.
And now, we live out in the middle of the country, and 70% of the sky is light washed from the city, which is 50 miles away.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
So I've got 70% of the sky on the eastern sky is light washed from Kansas City, even though it's 50 miles away. Mm-hmm. So, I had a clearer sky when I was a kid in town than I do now out in the country.
Yeah.
And you just sit there and it's like, I don't feel insignificant at all looking up and seeing the Milky Way. Or it's just awe-inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
I'm always big, like I love watching the moon. I love watching the sunrise. Like in the mornings when I walk, I'm always just in awe of the sunrise and everything like that, because I'm just like, I didn't used to be an early morning person, and I've become an early morning person after moving out to the farm. So, but I love that. Yeah, being the first person to see all the things, that happen first thing in the morning. And
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's so much different going out and doing that in the morning instead of sleeping in or whatever else, and it makes the day much better.
100% agree.
Yeah, excellent, very good. What are you and your kids' favorite book?
We really enjoyed Pilgrim's Progress.
Mm-hmm.
Because not just based off of the book, but then we were reading like the things about the book, and that made it more interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And then because like some things, when you read through it, especially when we read through it, they were 11 and 13. So a lot of it just kind of like whew, over their head. A lot of it went over my head, and I'd read it, a couple of times before. But getting to go through that book, we went through it very slowly.
Sure.
I would say maybe not like the favorite as much as most impactful. Mm-hmm. I would say that. As far as favorite, they have different genres altogether that they enjoy. So it would be really hard to settle on one as far as that's concerned.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you picked Pilgrim's Progress. That's one of my favorite books.
Is it really?
It really is.
That's really funny.
So
yeah, I would say, one thing that I think we covered that actually. No, I think you asked that. Yeah, I think we talked about that. Yeah,
one of my favorite books lately is Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, it's basically, he goes through and he shows that some of the stuff that's happening now, including like this smartphone, is like that. So he talks to some people from like Eastern Europe, and they go, "Why are you doing all that stuff? That's communist stuff just starting. Don't you have any common sense, people?" And he's basically saying, you're kind of getting in that way again. You need to get more faith. You need to get more. Yeah, that's one of my favorite recent books.
Yeah. One of the thoughts that I was having about is that so many people will build their lives around their work or making sports a priority. A percentage of kids that actually become, superstars in sports or whatever, and not that sports are a bad thing, or I mean. Though I was involved in sports growing up, enjoyed it tremendously, all those kind of things. Sports are not life, though. Even public school, it's not life. The job you go to, it's not life. Right. And, getting priorities straight, I think that's another thing that I've been able to teach the kids through homeschool, is that these things are not what makes a life.
Thank you for listening to the Thriving the Future podcast. Check us out on the web on thrivingthefuture.com. Also, come and join our conversation on Twitter at thrivingthefute